I kicked out my girlfriend and stepdaughter after they tried to exclude me from her wedding that I'm paying for. So, my stepdaughter Sarah is getting married on August 3rd. The whole wedding planning thing has been eating up her and her mom's time for months now. I'm talking every conversation, every free minute. They're obsessing over it. I say her mom because, well, we've been living together for about 10 years, but we're not married. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I'm really glad we never tied the knot. Anyway, back to Sarah. She graduated last December from university, which, by the way, I paid for. It was a state school, so not like Ivy League expensive, but still, $40K is nothing to sneeze at. And it's not just college I helped with. I also bought her a car so she could get to and from school. She's been living with us throughout her college years, and even after she graduated, still no job. She just chills at the house while planning her wedding. Now let me tell you about her real dad, David. Total deadbeat. He pops in and out of her life like some ghost that only shows up when it suits him. He's never contributed a penny to her education, hasn't paid any child support. Don't even get me started on that. And yet Sarah worships the ground this guy walks on. Every time he shows up, she's all, dad this and dad that, like he's some kind of superhero. Meanwhile, I've been the one holding it all together, paying for everything, being there when she needed anything. It's frustrating, but honestly, I've always just chalked it up to Lisa, my girlfriend, enabling it. She never pushed for child support in the settlement, and always made sure David had a place in Sarah's life, even when he'd disappear for months and break her heart over and over. Fast forward to the wedding planning. The venue holds about 250 people, which seems like a lot, but when you start adding up the bride's side, the groom's side, plus friends and family, it fills up fast. So, I figured, since I'm footing most of the bill, I should at least get to invite a handful of people. I'm not asking for much, just 20 people. Close friends, a couple family members, people who've been part of my life and helped me through the years. Lisa said, yeah, no problem, we'll take care of it, so I didn't think twice about it. Now here's where things start to go south. One Saturday, I'm out golfing with one of my buddies, Jake, who's on my list of 20 people I wanted at the wedding. Just casual talk, I asked him if he's coming, and he looks at me like I've got three heads. He says, nah, man, I didn't get an invite, but I got this announcement thing. So I'm like, what do you mean an announcement? And he goes to his car, digs around in the back seat through months of old mail, and pulls out this envelope. Sure enough, it's a wedding announcement, not an invitation. And guess whose name isn't on there? Mine. It's got David's name, her real dad, and Lisa's name, but nowhere does it mention me. The guy who's paying for this whole thing? At that point, I could feel the heat rising in my face. I kept my cool, but inside I was furious. So later, I go home and confront Lisa about it. And what does she say? Oh, well, 250 is a tight number and we had to make some cuts. Wait, what? My people, the 20 people I wanted at this wedding, didn't make the cut? I'm the one bankrolling this thing, and I can't even have 20 of my own people there? It was one of those moments where you can't even believe what you're hearing. Like, how did this even happen? So I'm standing there, seething, while she's trying to explain how there just wasn't enough room and that if some people don't RSVP, maybe we could squeeze a couple of my people in. At this point, I'm already thinking of pulling the plug on this whole thing. I mean, if they're not going to respect me enough to include the few people I care about, why am I even involved? But the real kicker, not using that word, but you get what I mean, came the next day. Sunday dinner. We're at Sarah's fiancé's parents' house, just your typical family dinner. Except when we get there, guess who's at the table? Yep, David, the deadbeat dad himself. So we sit down to eat, and halfway through the meal, Sarah drops the bomb on us. She's all smiles, saying how excited she is because David is going to be able to make it to the wedding and, wait for it, he's going to be the one to give her away. The whole room erupts in excitement, like this is the best news ever. Her fiancé's family is clapping, David's grinning like he's just won the lottery, and I'm sitting there, feeling like I just got sucker punched in the gut. It was like everything inside me froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here I am, the guy who's been there for her every step of the way, and now David, the guy who bailed on her over and over, is going to be the one to walk her down the aisle? I didn't know if I was going to cry, scream, or just flip the table over. I've never felt so disrespected in my entire life. I had to get up and do something, so I stood up and raised my glass. I'd like to make a toast, I said, and everyone goes quiet. You could hear a pin drop. I don't remember everything I said word for word, but the gist of it was this. It's been a pleasure being part of this family for the last 10 years, but today, Sarah and her fiancé have shown me something really important. I used to think I was someone special in this family, but now I see I'm just the guy who pays the bills. Since David is clearly the one who matters, I'll be stepping down from paying for this wedding. He can take care of it from here. You could see the shock spread across their faces. David looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Sarah just sat there, wide-eyed, and well, Lisa had this look on her face like she couldn't believe what was happening. I finished my drink, set the glass down, and said, "You can all let yourselves out." And just like that, I was done. Done with the wedding, done with Sarah, and done with Lisa. I transferred the money out of our joint account that night and started making calls to the vendors the next morning. I wasn't going to bankroll a wedding that I wasn't even really a part of. So after that dinner, I didn't waste any time. I went home and started making moves. I was done. I transferred all the money out of the joint account that Lisa and I shared. I knew it was going to hit her hard because, let's be real, she hasn't had a job in years. She's been living off me for as long as I can remember. Every bill, every grocery, every damn thing in that house, it's been on me. And now she had the nerve to cut me out of this wedding and let David play the hero? Nah, not happening. I started with the vendors. First up was the photographer. I'd already paid a deposit, but I figured it was worth a shot to get it back. So I called the guy up, and he was actually pretty chill about it. Said he'd refund me most of it, minus a small fee for holding the date. Whatever, that was fine with me. Better to lose a couple $100 than pay for a whole wedding I'm not even invited to anymore, you know? Next was the caterer. This one had me a little worried because catering companies can be sticklers when it comes to refunds. But again, I lucked out. They had a waiting list of people wanting my date, so they didn't even blink when I asked for my money back. Full refund, no questions asked. At this point, I was feeling pretty good about my decision. Everything was falling into place. The only real hiccup was the venue. They wouldn't give me back the full deposit, but honestly, I expected that. They kept $1,500, which sucked. But considering I was about to drop $40-50K on this whole wedding, it was a small price to pay to get out of this disaster. Now, I'm not going to lie. Part of me was waiting for the fallout. I knew Lisa wasn't going to take this well, and I was just bracing for the explosion. But you know what? She didn't say anything that night. Not a word. I slept in the guest room, expecting her to come knocking at some point, maybe to yell or cry or something, but no. Silence. Honestly, that silence was worse than anything else. It was like she'd just given up, like she didn't care enough to even fight for me or our relationship. The next morning, things finally hit the fan. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking my coffee when Lisa came in holding Sarah's wedding planner. She dropped it on the table in front of me like it was some kind of evidence in a court case. I didn't say anything, just stared at her, waiting for whatever rant she was about to unleash. "You're ruining everything," she finally said. Her voice was cold, not even angry, just defeated. I took a deep breath. "I didn't ruin anything, Lisa. You and Sarah made your choices. I'm just reacting to them." She thumbed through the planner, showing me all the details they'd planned out. The flowers, the decorations, the music, everything. I just stared at it, barely listening. I was done. The whole thing was meaningless to me now. But one thing did catch my eye. There was a whole section dedicated to the father-daughter dance. And guess who they picked all the songs for? David. Not me. David. That was the final nail in the coffin for me. I actually laughed. It was just so absurd at that point. I wasn't even a consideration in any of this. They didn't care about me. They cared about my wallet. "Look," I said, pushing the planner back toward her. "You and Sarah need to move out. I'm not paying for this wedding, and I'm done pretending like we're still a family. You can stay with her fiancé's family or find somewhere else, but you're not staying here." She didn't say much after that, just grabbed the planner and walked out of the room. I sat there for a while sipping my coffee, just thinking about everything. 10 years down the drain. It's funny how fast things can unravel when people show you who they really are. A few days went by without much happening. Lisa didn't try to talk to me, and Sarah avoided me like the plague. It was like we were strangers living in the same house. Then one morning, I woke up to find that they were packing. I didn't ask where they were going. I didn't care, as long as they were out. It was hard not to be petty while they packed. I wanted to throw some of their stuff in the garbage, just out of spite, but I held back. I didn't want to lower myself to their level. Besides, I'd already won by pulling the financial rug out from under them. Lisa kept giving me these dirty looks while she packed, but Sarah wouldn't even make eye contact. Good. I didn't want to see her face anyway. They left that afternoon. No goodbyes, no final words, just silence. I locked the door behind them, and it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was mine again. That night, I changed the locks. Call me paranoid. But I didn't trust that they wouldn't try to come back and pull some stunt. After everything they'd put me through, I wasn't taking any chances. With the new locks in place, I finally felt like I had control over my life again. I sat on the couch that night, cracked open a beer, and just relaxed. It was weird. I hadn't felt this calm in months. No more wedding stress, no more dealing with Sarah's entitled behavior, no more walking on eggshells around Lisa. I was free. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that they were trying to downsize the wedding. Apparently, Sarah's fiance's parents were stepping in to help cover the costs, but even they weren't too thrilled about it. I guess Lisa had burned a few bridges along the way. And get this, she actually tried to write herself a check from our joint account the day after the blowup. Too bad for her, I'd already moved the money. Nice try, though. Now, I'm not saying I'm happy about how things ended, but I'll be honest. I feel a hell of a lot better than I did before. I wasted too much time and money on people who didn't appreciate me. It's crazy how clear things become when you take a step back and really look at the situation. Looking back, I should have seen the signs way earlier. Sarah always had a thing for her real dad, and Lisa never put her foot down. I should have known I was just the guy paying the bills, nothing more. But hey, lesson learned, right? Now I get to move on with my life without the weight of their crap dragging me down. So yeah, that's where I'm at. The house is quiet, I've got my peace back, and I'm done with all their drama. If I hear more about the wedding, I'll let you guys know, but honestly, I'm not going out of my way to find out. Let them deal with their mess. I'm just glad I'm out of it. So after Lisa and Sarah moved out, things got quiet. Like, really quiet. It was weird at first. 10 years of noise and chaos, and now it's just me. I thought it'd feel lonely, but honestly, it was peaceful. No more wedding drama, no more worrying about Sarah's constant attitude, or Lisa guilt-tripping me. Just silence. But then came the aftermath, the part I didn't really expect. Once the dust settled, I started getting calls. And not just from Lisa or Sarah, nah, they stayed away, but from people who heard, through the grapevine, that I'd pulled the plug on the wedding. I guess word spreads fast when you've got drama this big. First call was from one of Lisa's friends, Maggie. She's always been one of those always in everyone's business types. She calls me up, acting all concerned like, "Oh, I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Now let me be clear. Maggie is not someone I'd consider my friend. She's Lisa's friend, the kind of person who always took Lisa's side in every little argument we ever had. So when she's pretending to care, I know it's just because she's fishing for gossip. I wasn't in the mood for that crap. "Maggie, I'm fine," I told her. "It is what it is. Sarah and Lisa made their choices. I made mine." That wasn't good enough for her. She kept pushing, asking for details, trying to make it sound like she was worried about me. I could tell she just wanted to hear me badmouth Lisa or Sarah, but I wasn't giving her the satisfaction. "Well," she said, "I just think you should know that Sarah's really hurt. She didn't mean to exclude you like that." "Oh, really? She didn't mean to? I mean, how do you accidentally exclude someone from their own life?" I bit my tongue, though, because the last thing I needed was more drama. I kept it short and ended the call, but I knew that wasn't the last of it, and I was right. A couple days later, I got a call from Sarah's fiance's mom, Joyce. Now I'd always thought Joyce was nice. We weren't close or anything, but she seemed like a reasonable person. This call was different, though. She was pissed. She jumped right into it. No small talk, just pure anger. "You've ruined everything," she yelled. "Do you have any idea what you've done to Sarah and Lisa? This wedding was supposed to be perfect, and now they're scrambling to fix your mess." I didn't even know where to start. Here's this woman who has never paid for anything, telling me I've ruined things because I stopped paying for a wedding I wasn't even invited to. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my cool. "Joyce, I didn't ruin anything. Sarah and Lisa did this to themselves. I'm not paying for a wedding that I've been excluded from. If they want a wedding, they can figure it out." She wasn't having it. She went on and on about how I was being selfish and how I should have just sucked it up for Sarah's sake. And the best part, she even suggested that I should still come to the wedding. For appearances. Yeah, because pretending everything's fine after being disrespected is exactly what I'm interested in doing. I told her, "Look, Joyce, if you're so concerned about the wedding, why don't you pay for it? I'm done." She didn't have much to say after that, just muttered something under her breath and hung up. That was the last time I heard from her, thank God. But it didn't stop there. Sarah finally decided to reach out, about a week after she and Lisa moved out. She texted me, which honestly kind of pissed me off. Like, she couldn't even call? After everything that happened, she just sends a quick text like it's no big deal. Her message was short and to the point. "I'm really disappointed in how you handled things. I thought you'd be more understanding." Understanding? I stared at that message for a good 5 minutes before I even knew how to respond. Understanding? She seriously thought I was the one who needed to be more understanding? I've spent the last 10 years supporting her, paying for her education, her car, and now her wedding, and she thought I needed to be more understanding. I finally texted back, I'm disappointed too, Sarah, but I've done enough for you. I'm not paying for a wedding that I'm not part of. Good luck with everything. That was it. She never replied. No apology, no explanation, nothing. Just silence. And honestly, that hurt more than I thought it would. I wasn't expecting her to grovel or anything, but I guess part of me hoped she'd realize how much she'd screwed up. But no, nothing. After that, things went quiet again. No more calls, no more texts. It was like they'd all just erased me from their lives, which I guess was for the best. But even though the drama had died down, I couldn't help but feel like I was mourning something. 10 years of my life, and now it was all gone. Lisa, Sarah, the future I thought we had, it was all just over. I started getting back into my routine, though. Work kept me busy, and I reconnected with some old friends. It was weird at first, not having Lisa around, but eventually I started to feel like myself again. I realized how much of my energy had been spent on keeping that relationship going, even when it was clear I wasn't getting anything back. One night I ran into Jake again, the buddy who hadn't been invited to the wedding. I told him everything that had gone down. He just shook his head and laughed. Man, you dodged a bullet, he said. If they couldn't even respect you for this, imagine how things would have been down the line. He was right. I'd spent so much time trying to make things work with Lisa and Sarah, thinking that one day they'd appreciate me, but it was never going to happen. And honestly, I'm better off without them. So yeah, that's where things stand. I haven't heard anything about the wedding since then, and I don't really care to. Lisa and Sarah made their choices, and I made mine. I'm moving on with my life, and it feels good to finally be free of their drama. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that you can't force people to respect you. No matter how much you do for them, if they don't see your worth, they never will. And that's fine. I'm done trying to prove myself to people who don't care. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a quiet night ahead of me. No more wedding stress, no more family drama, just peace. Update 1. So, a couple of weeks after everything settled down, I was starting to get used to my new routine. Life was quieter, a lot less stressful. I had the house to myself, and for the first time in a long while, it actually felt like my home again. I thought I'd finally left all the drama behind, but of course, that wasn't going to happen. I should have known better. It started on a random Thursday afternoon. I was at work going about my day like normal, when I get this call from a number I didn't recognize. Now, I usually ignore those, but for some reason, I picked up this time. And guess who it was? David. Yeah, that David. The real dad. I hadn't spoken to this guy in years, and suddenly he's calling me out of nowhere. At first, I wasn't even sure what to say. I just stood there, holding the phone, half expecting him to apologize or maybe say something to explain why he's calling me. But no, he jumped straight into it like we're old pals. Hey man, listen, I need to talk to you about something important, he says, his voice all casual, like this is just a normal chat. I'm thinking, what the hell does this guy want? But I stayed calm. Okay, what's up? Then he hits me with the craziest thing I've ever heard. He starts telling me how he's been hearing from Sarah and Lisa about how I've overreacted by pulling out of the wedding. Overreacted? This guy, who's barely been in Sarah's life, has the audacity to call me up and say I'm the one in the wrong? He said something about how I should have just let it go for Sarah's sake, that I should have been the bigger person and stayed involved. I was fuming. Here's this guy who swoops in at the last minute to play the role of the loving dad, telling me how I should have handled the situation. The same guy who abandoned her over and over again while I was there every day, paying for everything, making sure she had what she needed. I couldn't believe it, but it gets worse. After lecturing me about how I was wrong, he drops the real reason he's calling. Apparently, Sarah and her fiancé were struggling to make ends meet with the wedding after I pulled out, and David was trying to convince me to pitch in again. He actually had the nerve to ask if I could help him pay for the wedding. The same wedding I wasn't even invited to. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. I didn't mean to, but the whole thing was just too ridiculous. This guy seriously thought I'd hand over my hard-earned money to bail him out after he and Sarah pushed me aside? Nah, not a chance. David, I said, still trying to stop myself from laughing, there's no way I'm giving you a single cent. You and Sarah made your choices. You want to play dad? Go ahead and pay for the wedding yourself. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd hung up. But then he sighed and said, Come on, man. We're family. This is for Sarah's happiness. That hit a nerve. Family? I've spent 10 years trying to be there for Sarah, trying to build a family with her and Lisa. And now, suddenly, he's family because it's convenient? I wasn't having any of it. We're not family, I said, my voice harder than I meant it to be. You haven't been around. You don't get to play the family card now just because it suits you. If you really care about Sarah, then you figure it out. I'm done. And then I hung up. I'm not proud of it, but at that moment, I didn't care. I was done being the nice guy, done being walked over. The whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth, though. It wasn't just the fact that David had the nerve to call me. It was the fact that Sarah and Lisa were still trying to use me, even after I made it clear I was out. I couldn't believe they were desperate enough to send David to try and get money out of me. But if you thought that was the end, oh boy, you'd be wrong. A few days later, I get another call. This time, it's from Sarah herself. She hadn't spoken to me since the whole wedding debacle went down, so I figured something must have happened. Part of me thought, maybe she's realized what a mess this has all been and wants to apologize. Stupid, right? I answer the phone, and before I can even get a word in, she's already going off. Why are you making things harder for everyone? Do you know how much stress you've put me under? You should have just gone along with it. Why couldn't you just be supportive? I'm standing there, phone in hand, just stunned. I don't even know how to respond at first because it's like she's talking to a different version of me, one who apparently hasn't done anything for her over the last decade. Sarah, I said, trying to stay calm, I was supportive. I've been supporting you for 10 years. I paid for your school, your car, everything. But I'm not paying for a wedding I've been cut out of. That's not how this works. She wasn't having it. She kept going on about how I was ruining everything and how I needed to stop being selfish. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, the guy who had been there for her every step of the way, and now I'm the selfish one because I won't bankroll a wedding where I've been erased. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with the same Sarah anymore. The Sarah I helped raise, the one I'd spent years supporting, was gone. She had been replaced by someone who only saw me as a means to an end. As long as I was paying, I was useful. But the moment I said no, I was the villain. It hurt, more than I'd like to admit. But in that moment, I made peace with it. I wasn't going to change her mind, and I wasn't going to win this argument. I'd already won by walking away from the wedding, and that was enough. Look, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. You've made your choices. I've made mine. I wish you and your fiancé the best, but I'm done. You're on your own. And that was it. She didn't reply, just hung up. After that, I knew I had to close this chapter for good. I was done being the guy they turned to only when they needed something. I deserved better than that. So I started focusing on myself, my job, my friends, my life. And you know what? It felt good. Sure, it stung at first, but sometimes you have to walk away from people who don't see your value. And that's exactly what I did. Update 2. So, after all the crap with Sarah and David calling me to basically beg for money, things started to calm down. Or at least I thought they did. I guess when you cut people out of your life, you expect everything to just stop. Like the drama goes away and you finally get to live in peace. I was about to learn it doesn't work like that, not with people like Sarah and Lisa. A few weeks after Sarah's last call, I get home from work, and there's this letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name scribbled on the front. I already had a bad feeling about it before I even opened the thing. Sure enough, it's from Lisa. The letter was full of the usual garbage. She starts by acting like she's trying to be reasonable, saying she understands why I pulled out of the wedding, but that it was unfair to leave them scrambling. She said I should have had more respect for Sarah's feelings and helped her out for old time's sake. Yeah, right, like I'm going to forget everything that's happened and just swoop back in with my wallet because they can't figure out how to pay for their own mess. But then Lisa goes further. She actually tries to guilt trip me by saying Sarah's struggling with depression now because of everything that's happened. She writes, "She's been really down ever since you cut her out, and it's affecting her mental health. I'm worried about her. Maybe if you could sit down with her and have a heart-to-heart, things would be different." That hit me harder than I expected. Not because I believed her, but because part of me wanted to. I'd spent 10 years raising Sarah like my own kid, and even after all this, there was a small part of me that still wanted to make things right. But I couldn't. I knew if I went back into their lives, it'd be the same cycle all over again. Me giving, them taking, and me ending up feeling used. I threw the letter in the trash and went inside. I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their drama. Still, it stuck with me for a few days. I kept thinking, what if she's really struggling? What if I'm the one who pushed her over the edge? But then I remembered everything Sarah did, how she cut me out of the wedding, how she replaced me with David. This wasn't my mess to fix. They made their choices, and I made mine. A couple weeks later, I got a call from Jake, my buddy from the golf course. He's been one of the few people who's stuck by me through all this. He invites me over for a barbecue, says he's got some news. I figure, why not? It's been a while since I hung out with the guys, and I could use a distraction. So I head over to Jake's place, and as soon as I walk in, I can tell something's up. There's this weird energy in the air, like everyone knows something I don't. We're all standing around the grill, cracking open a couple beers, when Jake pulls me aside. Dude, you're not going to believe this, he says, grinning like he's about to drop the juiciest gossip ever. I roll my eyes, expecting some dumb story about one of the guys getting into trouble, but then he hits me with it. Sarah's wedding got canceled. I almost spit out my beer. What, canceled? Like, completely? He nods, and I can see he's trying not to laugh. Yeah, man. Apparently, there was some big blow-up between her and her fiancé's family, and the whole thing just fell apart. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel sorry for her. Part of me was like, serves her right. But another part of me remembered all the time and money I had put into that wedding before everything went sideways. All those months of planning, all the drama, and now it was just over. I asked Jake for more details, and he told me that Sarah's fiancé's family wasn't too happy with how things had been going. Turns out, Sarah and Lisa had been pushing for an even bigger wedding than they originally planned, and when they couldn't afford it without my help, they tried to get her fiancé's parents to cover the difference. Apparently, that didn't go over too well, and after a few big arguments, the whole thing just collapsed. Part of me wanted to reach out to Sarah, maybe to see how she was holding up, but I stopped myself. I knew if I got involved again, it'd just drag me back into the drama. And honestly, after everything they put me through, I didn't owe them anything. The barbecue went on, and I tried not to think too much about it. But later that night, when I got home, it hit me. This was it. The wedding was canceled, the relationship was done, and there was nothing left to tie me to Sarah or Lisa anymore. It was a weird feeling, like I had finally closed the book on this whole chapter of my life. Over the next few weeks, I started focusing more on myself. I picked up some new hobbies, spent more time with friends, and even started dating again. It felt good to move on, like I was finally living for me instead of always worrying about someone else's problems. One day, out of the blue, yeah, I know I'm not supposed to use that phrase, but screw it, I got a text from Lisa. I hadn't heard from her since the letter she sent about Sarah's depression. The message was short and cold. Just wanted to let you know we're moving out of state. Sarah's starting over. I stared at my phone for a while after reading it, trying to process how I felt. I guess part of me was relieved. Them moving away meant I wouldn't have to worry about running into them or dealing with their drama again. But another part of me felt empty. Not sad exactly, but like something had finally come to an end, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. I didn't respond to the text. There was nothing left to say. So, that's where things stand now. Sarah and Lisa are out of my life for good, and I'm finally free. It took a lot of crap to get here, but I feel like I've come out the other side stronger. Sure, it still stings sometimes, thinking about how things ended, but I've learned that some people just aren't worth the effort. You can bend over backward for them, but if they don't see your worth, it's never going to work. And now, I'm just focusing on me. It's funny how much better life gets when you stop putting your energy into people who don't appreciate it. Anyway, thanks for sticking around through all of this. Life's looking up, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. No more drama, no more games, just peace. Growing up, things were pretty standard in my family until my mom tragically passed away when I was just 10. A couple of years later, my dad remarried, hoping to bring some normalcy back into our lives, but that's when everything started to spiral. My dad and my new stepmom decided to adopt a girl around my age, named Sarah, which at first seemed like it might be a good thing. However, it quickly turned my world upside down. My dad, who was never the father of the year, shifted whatever affection he had from me to Sarah. It started with small things, like forgetting my school events but remembering hers. But it escalated to a whole new level of hurt the day he actually left me at a mall. Yes, a mall in another state. Luckily, he remembered and came back for me, but the damage was done. To make up for this massive blunder, he took me out on Sarah's birthday, thinking it would smooth things over. It didn't. Instead, it fueled a fiery rivalry between Sarah and me, making it clear that we were not going to be the sisters our parents hoped for. Sarah even had the nerve to tell me that she deserved our dad's love more than I did because she was adopted and needed more attention. Can you believe that? As if the mall incident wasn't enough, similar situations happened twice more. Each time my dad would realize his mistake, apologize profusely, and somehow it would end up making Sarah feel like the victim because it hurt her to see him apologize to me. It was like living in a twisted soap opera, where I was cast as the perpetual villain just for existing. Fast forward to college. I put physical and emotional distance between myself and my family, which seemed to finally wake my dad up to the reality of his neglect. He started trying to make amends, reaching out, attending events, and actually trying to be a father again. Things were looking up, or so I thought. 3 years of tentative reconciliation later, I was planning my wedding for December. It was supposed to be a beautiful closure to a year of rebuilding bridges. Dad was even going to give me away, a moment I'd imagined would solidify our patched-up relationship. But then, during a supposed casual lunch, which he turned into a family ambush by bringing Sarah and my stepmom unannounced, he dropped a bombshell. Sarah, who was suddenly getting married too, had set her date on the exact same day as mine. And here's the kicker. Dad had agreed to be at her wedding instead of mine. He actually had the audacity to ask me to move my wedding to the next year so he could accommodate Sarah's last-minute plans. When I pressed him, asking if he was really choosing her over me, he said yes without skipping a beat. I lost it. I told him not to bother coming to my wedding at all. I couldn't hold back and told Sarah exactly what I thought, that she was enjoying the attention of a dad whose daughter had always been an afterthought. I even threw in that her biological father had made the right decision by staying away, a low blow that I immediately regretted, but the words were already out. The fallout was nuclear. Dad tried to calm things down, but I was done. In the heat of the moment, I disinvited him from the wedding, told Sarah to enjoy her day without worrying about mine, and walked out. But here's where it gets even crazier. As the days passed, word got out about our public blow-up. Sympathy from family friends started pouring in. Not for Sarah, but for me. Several family friends who had watched me grow up sidelined began reaching out, offering support, even sharing their own observations of how unfairly I'd been treated over the years. Then came the revelation. One of Sarah's close friends confided in me that Sarah had been boasting about how she manipulated the situation to make sure our dad would choose her wedding over mine. It was all a game to her, one she felt she had won by securing our dad's undivided attention on what would have been my special day. Fueled by this new information and the community's support, I decided to confront Sarah and my dad one last time. This time, with the backing of not just my feelings, but the testimonies of those who had witnessed the years of neglect and manipulation. I laid it all out, the pain, the manipulation, the lies, and watched as the facade of the happy family crumbled for good. Dad was devastated by the revelations, finally seeing the extent of Sarah's manipulation and the pain it had caused. He tried to make amends, but for me, the damage was done. I was ready to move on, to focus on my wedding and the new chapter in my life without him. So here I am, a few months away from a wedding that will be smaller, but filled with people who truly support and love me. Sarah and my dad are trying to mend their own fractured relationship. But as for me, I'm looking forward to a future where I choose who is part of my life, based on genuine love and respect, not obligation or manipulation. So, am I the idiot? Edit. I booked my wedding date over a year ago. Now for the top comments before the update. What the actual hack is your dad doing? Not only did he completely dismiss your wedding, but he's also once again accommodating his stepdaughter over you. Not to mention, he also knew when your wedding date was also. Why did the step idiot choose your day? There are legit 364 other days. She could choose. I don't understand how your dad keeps falling for your stepsister's power play repeatedly. He really asked you to change your wedding day. That's insane. How convenient that out of all the days in the year, it just so happened that her wedding had to fall on the same date as yours. But just for spite, I booked the venue she wants just for it to sit empty on that day, so she can't use it. I am so sorry for you after reading your story. Your father is not worth your time or anything from you at all. He is stupid for putting her above you all the time. Hopefully you can have a wonderful wedding without him. I got the feeling that if Opie had moved her date somehow, stepsister would have had some issue that postponed her wedding. And the only alternative date would just happen to be Opie's new date. Honey, I can't imagine that the only date the stepdaughter could have picked had to be the one day you picked for your wedding. It sounds like it's going to block your father if he chooses his stepdaughter after this. I'm so sorry that your mom died. I'm a mom, and I'm sending you virtual hugs. I hope your future in-laws will take you in and love you like you deserve. Of course, you are not the idea. Update. The whole showdown with my dad and Sarah was draining, like running a marathon that you didn't train for. It was emotionally exhausting but also strangely liberating. For years, I'd carried this weight of feeling second best, always in the shadow of Sarah's needs and wants. Laying everything out in the open, despite how dramatic it was, felt like shedding a heavy coat I'd been wearing for too long. Afterwards, I spent a lot of time just processing everything, going over conversations, thinking about the things said, and the raw emotions that had spilled out. It was a lot to digest. My friends were my rock during this time. They listened, offered shoulders to cry on, and more than a few glasses of wine were shared as I talked through my feelings. They helped me see that, despite how broken things seemed, I was finally making decisions that prioritized my own well-being. With the family drama somewhat behind me, I redirected my focus towards the wedding planning. This was supposed to be a happy time, and I was determined to reclaim that joy. The wedding planning became a therapeutic process. Each decision, from the flowers to the guest list, felt like a step towards a new beginning, a celebration of love that was all about the people who genuinely cared. The ceremony was everything I could have hoped for and more. It was intimate, with every guest someone who had shown true support through thick and thin. There were tears, but this time they were from laughter and heartfelt moments. The day was a beautiful affirmation that despite the rocky roads, there can be wonderful endings, or rather, new beginnings. The weeks following the wedding were a time of quiet introspection. I thought a lot about family, what it means, how it shapes us, and how sometimes the family we choose is more impactful than the one we're born into. I started journaling, something I hadn't done in years. It helped me unpack my thoughts and feelings, putting things down on paper to make sense of them. I also resumed therapy, diving deeper into understanding the dynamics of my family relationships, my reactions, and how I could build healthier boundaries. It was hard work, often uncomfortable, but incredibly necessary. My therapist helped me explore areas of my life that needed attention, not just the wounds left by family issues, but also my aspirations, fears, and dreams for the future. Reconciliation with my dad is still a work in progress. We've had a few conversations since the wedding, tentative steps towards understanding each other better. He's been trying, in his own way, to make amends. We're not back to normal. Maybe we never will be, but we're learning how to interact in this new reality of ours. As for Sarah, we haven't spoken since that day. Maybe one day we'll find a way to bridge the gap, but for now, I'm giving myself permission to step back and heal without feeling guilty or pressured to mend fences on anyone else's timeline. Life now is about moving forward with a clearer understanding of who I am and what I want. The wedding wasn't just a union with my partner, it was a celebration of coming into my own, surrounded by love and support. I'm excited about what the future holds, planning for new adventures with my spouse, perhaps starting a family of our own, and continuing to grow both personally and professionally. To everyone who's been reading along, your comments and support have been a source of strength and comfort. Sharing this journey has been a cathartic experience, helping me to not only process my experiences, but also to connect with others who might be facing their own challenges. Here's to the future. May it be filled with love, growth, and happiness. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey, for your wise words and kind thoughts. Here's to more updates, hopefully filled with good news and new adventures. Cheers to moving forward, whatever that may look like. Story 2. I live in a super expensive area with my husband where just getting by without a decent paycheck is a pipe dream. I've got a pretty solid job that helps us meet those big city costs. But the dynamics shifted drastically last year when my husband, Jack, switched careers. Jack had been stuck in a job he hated for years, one that paid okay but never made him happy. He always dreamed of breaking into graphic design, which he's passionate about. Finally, after years of late-night classes and building a portfolio, he landed a job in his dream field. We were thrilled. Well, at least until we saw the paycheck. It was half what he used to make, and in this industry, benefits were non-existent. Initially, we thought we could manage. We reshuffled our budget, cutting back where we could, but the strain started to show almost immediately. Things got real when 3 months into his new job, I discovered Jack had used up most of our emergency savings to buy new software and equipment for his freelancing gigs without telling me. This hit me hard because we had agreed to discuss any big spending given our new financial constraints. Feeling the pinch, I sat Jack down and laid it all out. I told him he might need to rethink this career switch, at least until we were more financially stable. He was devastated, understandably so since he'd finally found work he loved. But reality is harsh, and our bank statements don't lie. Jack proposed getting a part-time job to supplement his income, or even moving to a cheaper area to ease the financial pressure. The part-time job idea seemed like a drop in the ocean of our expenses, and moving away meant I'd face a killer commute and less family time, which was a deal-breaker for me. His next suggestion floored me. He casually mentioned that his parents could chip in financially to help us out. This was shocking because Jack has always been proud of his independence, and accepting money from his parents would be a last resort. Plus, it felt like a temporary bandage on a gaping wound, not a sustainable solution. As we navigated this financial minefield, personal tensions began to rise. Jack felt I wasn't supporting his dreams, while I felt increasingly like his financial caretaker rather than his partner. The situation escalated when, during a rare dinner out to try and reconnect amidst our growing stresses, Jack admitted he had been hiding more debts from me, credit card bills racked up from networking events and pricey design workshops meant to boost his freelance career. This revelation was a breaking point. I felt betrayed. Trust, once the cornerstone of our relationship, was crumbling. We argued right there in the restaurant, voices raised, a spectacle for other diners. It was embarrassing and heartbreaking. In a desperate attempt to salvage his career without losing our financial security, Jack then made a drastic proposal. He suggested he could move back in with his parents for 6 months to a year. This would reduce our expenses and allow him to build up his freelance income without the pressure of immediate bills. But this meant living apart, a strain on any marriage, especially one already under stress. I was torn. On one hand, this could be the solution we needed to keep his dream alive, without sinking ourselves into deeper financial trouble. On the other hand, the thought of living separately felt like a step backward in our relationship, a semi-separation that neither of us had signed up for. As we debated this, the emotional toll became evident. Jack, feeling isolated in his pursuit of a meaningful career, started to withdraw. Conversations about future plans turned into arguments about money and priorities. We were stuck, and every solution seemed to come with its own set of massive compromises. Now, I'm trying to figure out how to balance supporting the person I love with protecting our financial future. It's a tightrope walk between love and practicality, and every step feels fraught with potential for a fall. Now for the top comments. So he worked for years helping to pay off your student loans in a job he hated. And whilst he was slaving away at a job he didn't like, you were okay. But as soon as the boot was on the other foot, it's a problem. How many years did he work at a job that he hated while he carried the burden of the finance so you could pay off your student loans? You are the idiot. Hello. Well, the hypocrisy, right? He worked a job he hated and paid the majority of that cost because Princess Selfish had student loans. Now that he's doing something he likes and she's the main breadwinner, she sits him down and tells him he has to quit his dream job. She does all of this when they're not even struggling. I feel like I'm carrying him the way he carried your student loan riddle. But for years, what have you tried to do yourself? Just because you make more money and work long hours doesn't mean the onus is on him to pull his weight. It doesn't sound to me like he's being a lazy freeloader to me. He worked a job that made him miserable to help get your student loan debt paid off. Now he's finally happy. It sounds like you're the one who wants to live in an expensive way in order to keep your current job and be near your family. You. You want your husband to leave the job he loves and return to a job you hate so you can keep living in your fancy house. Get a divorce for his sake. Story 3. So, the stage was set for a fun night out with friends at a local brewery, a gathering spot that promised good food, great drinks, and some much-needed catching up. My friend Mike, who isn't the main organizer usually but took the reins this time, had made a reservation. My wife and I, eager for a relaxing evening, were the first to arrive. To our surprise, we found out that Mike had booked an outdoor table. Given the cooler evening and a general preference for a more cozy setting, I asked the staff if moving indoors was possible. They were super accommodating, setting up a table for us inside without any fuss. As other friends began to trickle in, everyone seemed pleased with the indoor setup, comfy chairs, nice ambiance, and no chilly breezes. We ordered our first round of drinks, laughing and chatting away, when Mike finally made his appearance. And here's where things started to get weird. Mike walked in, noticeably alone without his wife, and looked genuinely confused and a bit annoyed to find us all indoors. He immediately questioned the change, and upon learning of our collective decision, revealed that he'd brought his 3 dogs along, assuming we'd all be sitting outside at the pet-friendly table he'd reserved. The mood shifted instantly. Mike explained that not only had he planned for an outdoor dog-friendly evening, but another friend, Sarah, had also brought her dog, anticipating a similar setup. I tried to keep things light, apologizing for the misunderstanding and explaining my preference for the comfort of being indoors. However, Mike seemed increasingly upset, insisting the dogs were part of his plan for a laid-back night. Feeling a bit cornered and wanting to avoid a bigger issue, I suggested maybe we could compromise. That's when the unexpected happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw one of Mike's dogs, which he had tied up just outside the indoor seating area, start to get agitated and bark loudly. The barking caught the attention of another patron's dog, leading to a noisy commotion that had staff and guests turning their heads. Attempting to calm the situation, Mike stepped outside to settle his dogs down. Meanwhile, the staff, concerned about the disturbance, approached us to discuss the possibility of either fully moving outside as originally booked or ensuring the dogs could be calmed if we chose to stay indoors. Feeling the night slipping into chaos, some of our friends suggested shifting back outside to stick to the original plan and appease Mike. Half of the group started gathering their things to move outdoors, while the other half, myself included, preferred to stay inside. Just as we were sorting this out, another shocking twist. Sarah's dog slipped its leash and darted towards the brewery's kitchen, causing a minor uproar as staff rushed to intercept the dog before it could burst into the food prep area. This incident sparked a heated debate among our group. Some blamed Mike for not communicating his plans clearly, while others felt that those of us who opted to stay inside were being inflexible. Mike, now dealing with his unruly dogs and facing criticism, became defensive, arguing that the evening was ruined by our unwillingness to stick to his original plan. The night ended with the group split across two tables, one indoors and one out, with the jovial mood replaced by an awkward tension. Mike's frustration was palpable, and in a surprising move, he apologized for the misunderstanding but suggested that perhaps next time planning should be left to someone else. Feeling the weight of the night's failures, I couldn't help but reflect on how a simple evening out had spiraled into a series of unexpected and unfortunate events. Conversations were had, apologies made, but the sense that our group dynamic had shifted was undeniable. In the aftermath, Mike reached out individually to apologize for the chaos, admitting that his expectations for a casual dog-friendly evening were perhaps not well thought out given the group's diverse preferences. As for me, the incident served as a stark reminder of how crucial clear communication is, especially when plans involve more than just deciding on a time and place to meet. So, was I too hasty in my decision to change the venue without consulting everyone, especially Mike? Or was the night doomed from the start by a series of miscommunications and unmet expectations? Either way, it was a dinner that none of us would forget anytime soon. Am I the idiot? Edit. The person who made the reservation volunteered. He did not plan the outing. It was more like a group chat. Hey, anyone want to do this? People were interested. A place was chosen, and the guy who broke the dogs volunteered to make the reservation. Now for the top comments. You are the idiot simply for moving it indoors without asking anyone first light. Not even one person. A couple of quick calls to ask what everyone preferred. If there was a specific reason for being outside would have been the better thing to do, rather than decide for everyone without consulting first. Then you saw inside pouting and wanting to be right, forcing everyone else to choose between what is now two groups and creating an awkward environment on what was supposed to be a nice evening out. Hope he kind of rubs me the wrong way. As he said, they sat inside to pounce, forcing a split in the group in the way they said some people went outside to be nice, as if no one could possibly prefer sitting outside with the other people and dogs. Just feels a little main character-ish. Well, I don't know. I love dogs. I own an enormous black lab that is the best dog. However, I don't feel the pressing need to take my dog everywhere I go. The dog is fine at home, enjoying the AC and shedding on my couch. Speaking of AC, I don't know about everyone else, but it has been insanely hot here. No way in heck I'd sit outside sweating my tatas off because some guy couldn't stand to be away from his dog for an hour. I think making reservations to specifically accommodate my own whims is idiot. And the guy who coordinated with another person about bringing his dog to, but couldn't be bothered to let the rest of the group know that it was going to be a dinner with the side of dog hair and sweat. He brought 3 dogs. Screw anyone who does that. Dogs, cats, babies, children, plus one's friends, relatives, in-laws, etc. Are uninvited guests unless agreed to in advance by the host or agreed to by the whole group. If it's a group event, regardless of who organizes the group event. The same applies to locations and events. So, no, the idiot. I hate when people impose their dogs on others like that. Story 4. So I nearly adult male dad left my mom when I was a young teen to be with his wife, the woman he was cheating on my mom with. That betrayal not only shattered our family, but also started a chain of events that made my teenage years pretty rocky. Despite his actions, my dad wanted to maintain a relationship with me, hoping I wouldn't think too badly of him. But honestly, that was a tall order. The custody arrangement was pretty standard. Judges around here stick to a strict 50-50th custody until the kid is old enough to voice a strong preference. My mom, who worked hard but never earned as much as my dad, struggled financially because the 50/50 custody arrangement meant no child support was required, even though there was a clear income disparity. A few years into this setup, as I neared adulthood, my dad, perhaps feeling some guilt or maybe just wanting to mend fences, approached me. He was desperate to prove he could still be a good father and offered to do anything to make up for his past mistakes. I saw an opportunity, not just for me but for my mom, who had been through so much. I told him if he really wanted to make things right, he could start by financially supporting my mom. Surprisingly, he agreed and started paying what we decided to call child support, which significantly eased my mom's financial burden and allowed her to pursue further education to better her career prospects. This arrangement seemed to work fine until the financial strain began to show at my dad's new household. He had remarried, and his new wife was not exactly thrilled about the money going to my mom. She especially didn't like it when financial pressures at home started to mount. My dad and his new wife had a baby, adding to their expenses, and her kids from a previous relationship were involved in numerous expensive activities. As if the financial drama wasn't enough, the emotional strain hit a breaking point recently at a family lunch that was supposed to be a simple catch-up. Unbeknownst to me, it turned into a showdown of familial obligations and loyalties. During the lunch, which already had an undertone of tension, my dad's wife dropped a bombshell. Due to their tightened budget, they had to cut back on her kids' activities. She bluntly told me that if my dad didn't have to support my mom, her kids wouldn't have to give up their extracurriculars. This confrontation escalated quickly, with accusations flying. She argued that my insistence on my dad supporting my mom was selfish, overlooking the needs of her children and their new baby. I retorted that her family's lifestyle adjustments weren't my concern, and my mom's well-being was non-negotiable, especially given the sacrifices she had made over the years. The argument took an even more shocking turn when she suggested that my mom should find another way to support herself, and that I was old enough to start contributing financially instead of relying on my dad. This suggestion was not only offensive, but also showed a clear disregard for the emotional and financial dynamics set by my dad's previous decisions. Her comment struck a nerve, and in the heat of the moment, I reminded her that her kids were not my responsibility, and that my dad had obligations to his first family, me and my mom, that didn't just disappear because he started a new one. The clash ended with her calling me ungrateful and cold-hearted, suggesting that I was ruining my chances of having any relationship with my half-sibling, the baby. Post-lunch, the fallout was massive. My dad tried to play peacemaker but ended up being pulled in two directions. He was stuck between his obligation to support my mom and his new family's demands. Meanwhile, the family dynamics continued to deteriorate, with resentments brewing on all sides. As things stand, the relationship between me and my dad's new family is more strained than ever. I'm left navigating these troubled waters, trying to uphold my principles while dealing with the backlash from all sides. It's a mess, and it's painful, but I'm determined to stand by my mom and ensure that her sacrifices are recognized, not penalized. Am I the idiot? Now for the top comments. What the heck did she expect sleeping with a married man? She can get a second job if money is a problem. Good to know your dad is only 50% sleazebag, not 100%. Regardless, it's absolutely not your problem. I hope your mom is doing well now, every time she brings it up. Reminded that it was her choice to sleep with a married man. She literally messed around and found out she's a goddamn hypocrite. I expect you to have empathy for me and mine. Yeah, like you had empathy for the man's wife and child whom you slept with? Absolutely not. The idea. Out of curiosity, how long will daddy continue paying until you're 18 or until mom graduates? For me, it's until a mom graduates is what I feel he owes. I can't technically make him pay that long, though. Then I'll be in a much better place after dad screwed her over so badly. It's the least he can do. And the least I expect. The stepmom actually said her kids needed therapy to help them adjust to such big changes. This made me laugh because they cut two activities out of a long list. Story 5. So I'm 30 and my husband is 33. We've been married for 3 years and have a little baby boy. Now there's something you gotta know about my mother-in-law. She's super tough to deal with and doesn't really get the whole boundaries thing. A few years back, she was really out of line, calling me names and saying I wasn't good enough for her son, which obviously didn't sit well with me. I had a serious talk with my husband about it, and he actually stepped up and talked to her. Things got a bit better after that. She's still not my favorite person, but I've been trying to keep the peace. Choosing my battles wisely. This past weekend, there was a wedding we all went to, including my in-laws. Here's where it gets tricky. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law decided they didn't want to cough up cash for a hotel near the wedding venue because it was pricey. Instead, They asked my husband if they could crash at our place while we stayed at the wedding hotel. Now, my husband didn't even check with me before saying yes to them, which was kind of a bummer, but I figured I'd let it slide because my sister sometimes stays at our house too. Still, a heads up would have been nice. So, we head off to the wedding, and when we get back to our house the next day, there they were, just chilling in our place. They stayed in the guest bedroom, which I had spent ages cleaning and prepping for them. No small feat with a baby around. But here's the kicker. I found out that not only had my sister-in-law slept in my bed, but also, the next morning, my mother-in-law had joined her there. I was mortified. My bedroom was a mess. I mean, it's my private space, and I hadn't cleaned it up for guests because, well, who would think anyone would go in there? It felt like a huge invasion of privacy. They crossed a major line by snooping around and then actually sleeping in my bed. And honestly, those sheets were definitely not guest-ready. When I confronted my husband, hoping he'd back me up, he actually defended them. He said he'd told them it was okay to use our bed and thought I wouldn't mind. He even compared it to the time my sister and I had to share my bed because we ran out of sleeping space, which was totally different. This time, it felt like my personal space was just taken over without my consent. I was so upset, I couldn't even talk to him. And now he's mad at me, saying I embarrassed him in front of his family by making a big deal out of it. He doesn't get why I'm so upset about them using our bed and thinks I'm overreacting. So here I am feeling super disrespected in my own home. Not just by my in-laws, but now by my husband too. It's like, where do I even go from here? How do I make it clear that what happened was not okay and that my feelings are valid? It's a mess, and I'm just trying to figure out how to deal with all this drama while keeping the peace, or figuring out if that's even possible now. Now for the top comments. Yeah, a huge no to anyone sleeping in your bed without a conversation. And both sides agree. It's weird your family would still choose to sleep in your room knowing it wasn't prepared for a guest like the other room as well, but more, right? I guess they were given permission. The main issue comes down to your husband giving them the option without talking to you first. It's not okay for sure. Speak to him and place hard boundaries. If your husband will not step up and keep disrespecting your boundaries, maybe it's time to think about you stepping out or bringing this to him. I wouldn't want my child to be raised in an environment where their own father and paternal side disrespect the mother and don't see anything wrong while doing so. Not the issue yet, but get marriage counseling ASAP. This story is titled, Stepsister Stole from My Dad, Stepmom Framed Me, and I Got Disowned, but Karma Hit Them Hard. I was 17 when my life completely fell apart. To be honest, things hadn't been great for a while. My dad and I weren't exactly close, and his marriage to Carol, my stepmom, only made things worse. But what happened that day? I still replay it in my head, wondering if there was ever anything I could have done differently. Let me back up a little. My stepsister Ashley was the golden child. She was 20 at the time, 3 years older than me, and had this way of getting everything she wanted. She was one of those people who could do no wrong in the eyes of adults, especially my dad. Meanwhile, I felt like I couldn't breathe without someone accusing me of doing it wrong. I learned early on to keep my head down and stay out of the way, but even that wasn't enough. Ashley hated me. I don't use that word lightly, but it's the truth. She had this venomous energy around me that I could never understand. I tried being nice when I first moved in with them, but it didn't take long to realize it didn't matter what I did. She just didn't want me there. And Carol? She only made it worse. If Ashley said the sky was green, Carol would be out there arguing with NASA to back her up. It was little things at first. Ashley would borrow my stuff without asking. Makeup, clothes, even my phone charger, and then play dumb when I confronted her. If I complained to my dad, Carol would swoop in, twisting the story to make me sound unreasonable or selfish. She's just borrowing it, she'd say. Why are you always so dramatic? The worst part was that my dad believed them. Every single time. I think part of him was just relieved not to have to deal with the fallout of his divorce from my mom. He'd latch onto whatever story Carol fed him because it was easier than dealing with me. If you asked him, I was the problem child, just like my mom. He liked to throw that one around a lot. You're just like her, he'd say, whenever I dared to speak up. He never said it like it was a compliment. So, by the time the watch incident happened, things had already been building for years. My dad had this watch, this ridiculously expensive, custom-made thing that my mom had given him back when they were married. It wasn't just a watch to him, it was sentimental. One of the few things he kept from their marriage, though he'd never admit it outright. He wore it on special occasions and polished it like it was some kind of family heirloom. I didn't even realize the watch was missing until I came home from school one day and walked straight into a storm. My dad was pacing in the living room, his face bright red. Carol was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, glaring at me like I'd just committed some terrible crime. And Ashley? She was sitting off to the side, looking way too innocent. It was the kind of innocent that practically screams guilt, but my dad never saw it that way. "Where is it?" my dad barked the moment I stepped inside. I froze, confused. "Where's what?" "The watch," Carol snapped, like I was being difficult on purpose. "Don't play dumb, young lady. Ashley saw you sneaking around in your dad's room." "What?" I wasn't. My brain scrambled to catch up. I'd barely been home that week except to sleep. The only time I'd even gone near their room was to grab the cat when she bolted upstairs. "I didn't take anything." Ashley nodded, her expression all fake concern. "I saw you coming out of Dad's room the other day. You looked sketchy." Sketchy? Really? That's what she was going with? "I didn't take your stupid watch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could already feel the panic setting in. "I didn't even know it was gone." Carol shook her head, her lips curling into that smug little smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won. "You've been acting strange lately, ever since the cat died. Maybe you were looking for attention." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My cat, my childhood pet, had passed away the week before and I was still grieving. She'd been with me since I was 3 years old, the one constant in my life when everything else fell apart. And now Carol was using that against me? I couldn't believe it. "I'm not looking for attention," I shot back, my voice shaking. But my dad cut me off before I could even finish. "Enough!" he shouted. "I've had it with your nonsense. First the attitude, and now this? You're just like your mother, a liar and a lunatic." My heart dropped. I could feel my throat tightening, tears threatening to spill over. "I didn't take it," I whispered. "I swear." But he wasn't listening. He never listened. Carol was already packing up my things, throwing them into a bag like she couldn't get me out of the house fast enough. My dad stood there, arms crossed, watching it all happen. Ashley stayed on the couch, not saying a word, but the smirk on her face said it all. She'd won. "Get out," my dad said, his voice cold and final. "Go to your mother's if she'll have you. But you're not staying here." I begged him to reconsider, to at least hear me out, but it was no use. He'd made up his mind. To him, I was guilty, and that was the end of it. By the time Carol shoved the duffel bag into my arms and slammed the door behind me, I was too numb to even cry. I walked to the bus stop in a daze, replaying the whole thing over and over in my head. How could my dad, my own father, throw me out like that? Over a watch? I didn't know where else to go except my mom's house. She wasn't exactly stable. She had her own issues, but at least I knew she wouldn't accuse me of being a thief. My mom was surprised to see me, but not in the warm, "Oh, honey, what happened?" way you'd expect. She wasn't the comforting type. Her reaction was more like, "Well, what did you do this time?" "I didn't do anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad thinks I stole his watch and he kicked me out." She gave me this look, the kind that says, "I don't believe you, but I'm too tired to argue." "You can stay here, but don't expect me to fix your problems," she said. "I've got enough on my plate." That pretty much set the tone for my life for the next few years. My mom's place wasn't much of a home. She lived in a tiny apartment that smelled faintly of cigarettes and mildew, with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors that groaned under the weight of your footsteps. It was always a mess. Papers piled on every surface, half-empty coffee cups forgotten on the counter, and a sink that seemed permanently full of dishes. But it was better than being on the streets. I spent that first night on her old, lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day played on a loop in my head. Ashley's smug face, Carol packing my bag, my dad's cold eyes as he told me to leave. I kept thinking, how could he believe them over me? But no matter how many times I asked myself that, the answer was always the same. He never really wanted me there to begin with. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my mom arguing with someone over the phone. I didn't have to guess who it was. She had plenty of people in her life to argue with. Old friends, old flames, landlords, the electric company. When she wasn't fighting with someone, she was either chain-smoking on the balcony or binge-watching whatever trashy reality show was on. She wasn't a bad person, but she wasn't exactly stable either. I tried to make myself useful around the apartment, partly to earn my keep and partly to distract myself. I cleaned up, did the dishes, and helped sort through the mountain of unopened mail on the kitchen table. My mom didn't say much, but she didn't stop me either. It was her way of saying thanks, I guess. School was my only escape. I was in my senior year of high school, and while most of my classmates were worrying about prom and college applications, I was just trying to survive. I got up early every morning to take the bus, spent my days keeping my head down in class, and worked part-time at a fast food joint after school to save up some money. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to tell anyone what had happened. Not my teachers, not my coworkers, not even my friends. I wasn't close to a lot of people, and the few friends I did have didn't really know what my home life was like. They thought my dad was strict, sure, but they didn't know about the constant tension, the feeling that I was walking on eggshells every second I was in that house. I tried reaching out to my dad a few times in those first few weeks. I left him voicemails, sent him texts, even wrote an email explaining everything. I told him I didn't take the watch, that I would never do something like that. I begged him to at least hear me out, but he never responded. Not once. That hurt more than anything else. Not just that he didn't believe me, but that he didn't care enough to even ask for my side of the story. He'd made up his mind, and I was just gone. Meanwhile, Ashley and Carol, they were living their best lives. I saw pictures on social media, Ashley at some fancy brunch, Carol showing off a new handbag, and it made me sick. They didn't just win, they got to keep living comfortably while I was struggling to scrape by. It wasn't fair, but what could I do? They had my dad wrapped around their fingers, and I had nothing. My mom, for all her faults, didn't make me feel like a burden. Not exactly. But she wasn't exactly a warm presence either. She had her own issues to deal with, and I was just another body in her already cramped apartment. She let me stay as long as I kept out of trouble, but it was clear I couldn't rely on her for much beyond that. Still, I kept going. I graduated high school, which felt like a miracle in itself. My mom didn't come to the ceremony, but I didn't expect her to. It was just me, sitting in the back row with the other kids who didn't have a cheering section. I didn't even have anyone to take a picture with, but I was proud of myself for making it that far. After graduation, I worked full-time at the fast food place while saving up for college. My mom didn't have the money to help, and my dad, forget it. He didn't even acknowledge my existence anymore. But I managed to scrape together enough for community college, and eventually I transferred to a university. It wasn't easy, nothing in my life ever was, but I made it work. Over time, the pain started to dull. I stopped checking my phone for messages from my dad. I stopped thinking about Ashley and Carol, about the life they stole from me. I focused on myself, on building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. It wasn't much, but it was mine. 4 years passed like that. I graduated from college with a degree I was actually proud of and got my first real job. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of independence I'd never had before. My mom was proud in her own way, even if she didn't always know how to show it, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to move on. Then, out of the blue, I got an invitation to my grandpa's 75th birthday party. I wasn't sure what to think at first. After everything that had happened with my dad, I hadn't expected to hear from anyone on that side of the family. But Grandpa had always been different. He wasn't like my dad or Carol. He'd helped me out a couple of times when I was really struggling, sending money without asking questions. He wasn't rich, but he cared in a way that felt real. So when I saw his name on the invitation, I couldn't say no. I owed him that much. Still, the thought of seeing my dad again made my stomach churn. What would I even say to him? Would he apologize? Pretend nothing had happened? I didn't know, but I decided I had to face it. Not for him, for Grandpa. Walking into Grandpa's 75th birthday party felt like stepping into a time capsule, but one filled with tension instead of nostalgia. The farmhouse he rented for the celebration was beautiful. A big open yard with string lights, folding chairs set up under a white tent, and tables filled with homemade food. For anyone else, it probably looked like the perfect family gathering. But for me, it felt like a minefield. I hadn't seen my dad, Carol, or Ashley in 4 years. Not since the day I was thrown out. As I parked my car and sat there staring at the entrance, I could already feel the lump forming in my throat. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, but the invitation wasn't from them. It was from Grandpa. He'd always been the one person on my dad's side of the family who genuinely cared about me. I couldn't let my fear of seeing them ruin his big day. When I stepped inside, I immediately regretted not bringing a friend for moral support. The first people I saw were distant cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. A few smiled and waved, but most barely recognized me. I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong. But then I spotted Grandpa, standing near the drinks table, chatting with one of his friends. He looked so happy. His face lit up with the kind of joy you only see on someone who's truly content. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, walking up to him. His face lit up even more when he saw me. "There's my girl," he said, pulling me into a big hug. "I wasn't sure if you'd make it, but I'm so glad you did." "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." He squeezed my shoulder and introduced me to a few of his friends. For a little while, I felt okay, even comfortable. I stuck close to him, avoiding the tables where my dad and Carol were sitting. I hadn't seen them yet, but I could feel their presence in the air, this invisible weight pressing down on me. Eventually, though, I couldn't avoid them any longer. It happened while I was grabbing a plate of food. I turned around and there they were, my dad, Carol, and Ashley, sitting together at a table, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just seeing them again. It was how normal they looked, like the last 4 years had been a vacation for them, while I'd been clawing my way back from rock bottom. My dad caught my eye first. His face froze for a moment, like he wasn't expecting to see me. Then he quickly looked away, pretending I wasn't there. Carol glanced up, and when she saw me, her lips curled into that same smug smile she always wore, the one that made me want to scream. Ashley didn't even acknowledge me. She was too busy scrolling on her phone, acting like none of this had anything to do with her. I took a deep breath and walked away. I wasn't about to let them ruin this for me. Grandpa had been there for me when no one else was, and I wasn't going to let their presence make me forget that. Still, it was hard to focus on anything else. Every time I looked around, I caught glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye. My dad laughing with some uncle, Carol whispering to one of the aunts, Ashley flipping her hair like she was still the queen of the world. It wasn't until Grandpa stood up to give his toast that things really started to unravel. "Thank you all for being here," he began, raising his glass. The crowd quieted down, everyone turning to listen. "I feel so lucky to have lived 75 wonderful years, surrounded by such an incredible family." He went on for a bit, sharing stories about his childhood, his marriage to Grandma, and how proud he was of his kids and grandkids. It was sweet, and I could tell it meant a lot to him to have everyone there. But then his tone shifted. "There's one more thing I need to say," he said, his voice a little sharper now. "Something that's been weighing on my heart." The room went completely silent. I glanced around, and I wasn't the only one who looked confused. Grandpa set his glass down and took a deep breath. "A few years ago, my son James," he paused, looking directly at my dad, "lost a very important watch. A watch that meant a lot to him. At the time, it caused quite a bit of conflict in the family." My chest tightened. I could feel everyone's eyes turning toward me. My dad's face turned pale, and Carol stiffened in her seat. Ashley was frozen, her expression unreadable. I wanted to disappear. "But recently," Grandpa continued, "I found out what really happened to that watch." The tension in the room was unbearable. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Grandpa reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. "An old friend of mine runs a pawn shop," he said. "We were reminiscing about the good old days when he mentioned something that caught my attention. He told me about a very particular watch someone had brought in to sell a few years back. Turns out that someone was Ashley." The silence that followed was deafening. My dad's face went from pale to red in seconds. Carol's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Ashley just sat there, frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. Grandpa wasn't done. "According to my friend, Ashley said she needed the money for car repairs after an accident she didn't want her father to know about. She told him she'd figure out a way to cover her tracks. And it seems she did, by blaming someone else." All eyes were on Ashley now. My dad turned to her, his voice low and shaking. "Ashley, is this true?" She stammered, her face flushing. "I didn't mean—" Carol jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. "James, she was young. She made a mistake." "A mistake?" Grandpa's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You destroyed someone's life over a mistake? You let this girl—" He gestured toward me. "Be kicked out of her home while you sat back and did nothing. That's not a mistake, Carol. That's cruelty." I couldn't stay. My head was spinning, my chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe. Without a word, I slipped out the door, leaving the chaos behind. I didn't want to see their reactions. I didn't want to hear the excuses or the justifications. I just needed to get out of there. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. After all these years, the truth was finally out. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt hollow. When I slipped out of Grandpa's party that night, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My emotions were all over the place. Anger, sadness, relief, and something I couldn't even name. I didn't feel victorious, even though the truth about the watch was finally out. If anything, I felt more lost than ever. The air outside was cool, and I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I could still hear faint murmurs of conversation from inside the farmhouse, but I couldn't make out the words. My hands were shaking, and I gripped the keys in my pocket to steady myself. I just needed to leave. I climbed into my car and drove aimlessly for a while, not ready to go home and face the silence of my apartment. I thought I'd feel vindicated when the truth came out. For 4 years, I'd carried the weight of being falsely accused, and now everyone knew I wasn't the thief. But instead of feeling free, I just felt empty. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw a missed call from my dad. Then another, and another. By the time I pulled over to check my messages, he'd left 3 voicemails. I hesitated for a moment before hitting play. The first message started with his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know. I didn't want to believe it, but I guess I was wrong. Just call me back, please." The second was shorter, but more desperate. "I don't know how to fix this. I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Please." The third one, though, took a different tone. "I can't believe you let Dad humiliate me like that in front of the whole family. You should have told me what he was planning. This isn't how families handle things. We need to talk." I stared at the phone in disbelief. He's blaming me? After everything he put me through, after believing Ashley and Carol over me without a second thought, he had the nerve to act like I was the one who betrayed him? I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and started driving again, trying to make sense of it all. The next morning, I woke up to more messages. My dad had sent a string of texts that ranged from apologizing to accusing me of turning Grandpa against him. Carol hadn't reached out, and neither had Ashley, not that I expected them to. But hearing from my dad just made everything more confusing. What did he want from me? An apology? Forgiveness? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to face him. Grandpa called me later that day. His voice was calm, but concerned, and I could tell he felt guilty about what happened at the party. "I'm sorry if I put you in an uncomfortable position," he said. "I thought it was time the truth came out, but I didn't mean to hurt you in the process." "It's not your fault," I said quickly, and I meant it. If it weren't for Grandpa, the truth might never have come out. "I'm glad you said something. I don't know how to feel about any of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Take your time," he said. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. But just know, whatever you decide, whether you want to talk to your dad or not, I'll support you." Hearing those words made me tear up. Grandpa had always been the one steady presence in my life, the one person who didn't make me feel like I was a problem to be solved. I thanked him and promised to visit soon, though I didn't know when I'd feel ready. In the days that followed, my dad's messages kept coming. At first, they were filled with apologies, promises to make things right, and pleas for me to meet with him. But as I kept ignoring them, his tone shifted. The texts became more accusatory, filled with lines like, "I don't know why you're shutting me out," and "This isn't just about you. You're tearing the family apart." The family? What family? The one that threw me out like I was trash? The one that let Ashley and Carol walk all over me for years? I couldn't believe he had the audacity to frame it that way. Every message he sent just made me angrier, but I still couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't know what to say, or maybe I just didn't think it would make a difference. As for Ashley and Carol, they stayed silent. I didn't hear a single word from either of them, which was fine by me. I didn't want their fake apologies or half-hearted excuses. They'd done enough damage, and I had no interest in giving them another chance to hurt me. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. A week after the party, I got a call from one of my cousins. She was always the family gossip, and she wasted no time filling me in on everything that had happened after I left. According to her, the party turned into a disaster the moment Grandpa finished his toast. My dad tried to defend Ashley, claiming it was just a misunderstanding, but Grandpa shut him down, saying there was no misunderstanding when it came to lying and stealing. Carol tried to play the victim, saying Grandpa had ruined the family's reputation by airing their dirty laundry in public. But no one was buying it. By the end of the night, most of the relatives were whispering about how Ashley and Carol had manipulated my dad for years, and how he'd been blind to it. It was the first time in my life I'd felt like anyone on that side of the family actually saw the truth. My cousin also told me that Ashley had stormed out in tears, refusing to talk to anyone, while Carol stayed behind, trying to do damage control. My dad, apparently, just sat there looking like he didn't know what to do. Hearing all of this should have made me feel better, like justice had finally been served. But instead, it just made me sad. Sad that it had taken this long for the truth to come out. Sad that my dad was only realizing now how much he'd screwed up. Sad that even with the truth out in the open, I still didn't feel like I'd gotten any closure. A few days later, my dad showed up at my apartment. He didn't call ahead or ask if I was home. He just knocked on the door like he had every right to be there. When I opened it and saw him standing there, I felt my chest tighten. He looked tired, older than I remembered, and his eyes had this desperate look in them that I didn't know how to process. "We need to talk," he said. I stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the door. Part of me wanted to slam it in his face, but another part of me, the part that still craved his approval, no matter how much I hated it, told me to hear him out. "Fine," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Talk." I stood there, gripping the edge of the door, as my dad shuffled into my apartment. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of everything that had happened had finally caught up to him. He didn't say anything at first, just glanced around my apartment like he was trying to place me in this new version of my life. I crossed my arms and waited, my stomach twisting into knots. "Nice place," he said awkwardly, finally breaking the silence. "Thanks," I replied flatly. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. Not after everything. "What do you want?" He looked at me like I'd just slapped him, but I didn't feel bad about it. He wasn't here to catch up or make small talk. He had a reason, and I wasn't going to let him dance around it. I came to apologize," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I know I screwed up. Big time. I should have believed you, and I didn't. I let them. I let them convince me you were lying, and that was wrong." I stared at him, trying to gauge whether he actually meant it or if he was just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. "It took you 4 years to figure that out?" His shoulders sagged and he looked down at the floor. "I know. I was blind. I wanted to believe Carol and Ashley because it was easier than admitting that my family wasn't perfect. I didn't want to face the fact that they could lie to me like that. And, I don't know. Maybe I was afraid you'd turn out like your mom." There it was, the thing he always threw in my face. I felt my jaw tighten. "You mean the mom you divorced and called crazy every chance you got?" He winced but didn't argue. "I know I said some things I shouldn't have. About her, about you. I was wrong. And I see that now." "You see it now?" I shot back, my voice rising. "It took Grandpa blowing up your perfect little bubble for you to even consider that maybe I wasn't the problem? Do you have any idea what it was like for me? Being thrown out like I was nothing? And for what? A watch Ashley stole to fix her car?" "I know," he said quietly. "I can't imagine how much that hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "You can't imagine? You don't have to imagine, Dad. You lived it. You made it happen." He flinched, and for a moment, I thought he was going to leave. Part of me hoped he would, but instead, he took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. "You're right," he said. "I failed you. As a father. I let you down when you needed me most, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking for it anyway." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let go of the anger that had been eating at me for years. But another part of me, the part that still felt like a 17-year-old kid standing on the sidewalk with a duffel bag, couldn't let him off the hook so easily. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. "Not yet, anyway." He nodded, like he expected that answer. "I understand. I want to fix things, if I can. I want to be part of your life again." I shook my head, frustration bubbling up inside me. "You don't get to just walk back into my life and act like nothing happened. You let them ruin everything for me, and now you want to fix it? How? What could you possibly do to make up for 4 years of ignoring me?" He didn't have an answer for that. He just stood there, looking lost and ashamed. And maybe that should have made me feel better. But it didn't. It just made me feel more empty. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I can't change what I did. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am and hope you'll give me a chance to make things right." I stared at him for a long moment, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to scream at him to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I'd felt all those years. But another part of me just felt tired. Tired of carrying the anger. Tired of reliving the betrayal. Tired of trying to figure out what I owed him, if I owed him anything at all. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't just let this go. I need to figure out where I stand with you." He nodded again, his face heavy with emotion. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all the nights I spent crying myself to sleep, all the times I begged him to listen to me, and the sympathy vanished. "I think you should go," I said, stepping back toward the door. He hesitated, like he wanted to say more, but then he nodded and walked past me. "I'm sorry," he said again as he stepped out into the hallway. "For everything." I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, my chest heaving with a mix of emotions I couldn't even name. Relief, sadness, anger, closure? Maybe. I wasn't sure yet. In the days that followed, I started to process everything. Grandpa called to check in on me, and I told him about the conversation with my dad. He didn't try to push me one way or the other, just listened and let me vent. It helped more than I expected. My dad kept his promise and didn't contact me again, though I knew the door was open if I ever wanted to reach out. As for Ashley and Carol, I didn't hear a peep from them, and that was perfectly fine with me. I didn't need or want their apologies. Final update. About a week after my conversation with my dad, Grandpa called me over to his place. He sounded serious, almost grim, which wasn't like him at all. When I arrived, he had a stack of papers spread out on his coffee table. "I've been doing some digging," he said, "and what I found is worse than I thought." It turned out that Grandpa, in his frustration over the watch incident, had started going through old financial records for the family business. My dad, Carol, and Ashley had been living comfortably off family money for years, but something about the way they handled their finances had never sat right with him. What Grandpa discovered was shocking. Carol and Ashley hadn't just lied about the watch. They had been running a string of financial scams behind my dad's back for years. They'd siphoned money from the business accounts, taken out credit cards in my dad's name, and even racked up debt on loans he didn't know existed. The watch incident was just the tip of the iceberg. Grandpa explained that Ashley had a habit of spending money she didn't have, and Carol had been covering for her by moving funds around and hiding transactions. It wasn't just careless spending, it was deliberate fraud. Grandpa's voice was calm but firm as he laid it all out. "Your dad has no idea how much trouble they've gotten him into," he said. "And frankly, he's let them get away with it for too long." I was floored. I mean, I always knew Carol and Ashley were manipulative, but this was next level. Grandpa told me he had already consulted with his lawyer and decided to take drastic action. "Your father isn't responsible enough to handle the family legacy," he said. "And I'll be damned if Carol and Ashley get their hands on a single cent." In one swift move, Grandpa disinherited my dad. Everything that was supposed to go to him, money, property, trust funds, was being redirected. A significant portion was now going to me, which I didn't even know how to process. "I'm not doing this to punish your father," Grandpa said. "I'm doing it to protect you and the family's future. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences." The fallout was immediate. Grandpa didn't waste any time putting his plan into action, and within days, my dad found out he had been cut off. The house they were living in, which Grandpa technically owned, was put on the market. My dad was given an ultimatum. He could stay in the house, but only if Carol and Ashley left. Predictably, my dad refused. Carol and Ashley were his family, after all, and he couldn't imagine turning his back on them. So Grandpa followed through and began the process of evicting them. They had 30 days to vacate. The news sent Carol into a tailspin. She tried everything: begging, guilt-tripping, even threatening to sue Grandpa. But none of it worked. Grandpa's lawyer had made sure every loophole was closed, leaving Carol with no legal ground to stand on. Ashley, meanwhile, was spiraling. With no money to fall back on, she was scrambling to pay off her debts. At one point, she even reached out to me, sending a long, rambling text about how sorry she was and how much pressure Carol had put on her. I didn't respond. She could blame Carol all she wanted, but at the end of the day, Ashley was a grown adult who had made her own choices. She ruined my relationship with my dad and turned my life upside down. I didn't owe her anything. As for my dad, he was a mess. The man who had once been so sure of himself, so quick to judge and condemn me, was now on the verge of losing everything. He kept trying to contact me, alternating between apologizing and blaming Grandpa for turning me against him. I only responded once. "Until you take full responsibility for what happened, I don't want to hear from you," I wrote. "You made your choice when you believed Carol and Ashley over me. Now you have to live with it." I don't know if he'll ever truly understand how much he hurt me. Maybe he's too wrapped up in his own guilt to see the bigger picture. Or maybe he just doesn't care. Either way, I'm done trying to fix something that's so clearly broken. The one bright spot in all of this has been Grandpa. He's been my rock through everything, always reminding me that I'm not alone. We've gotten closer than ever, and he's made it clear that he wants to support me however he can. "I can't undo what they did to you," he told me recently, "but I can make sure you have the future you deserve." Hearing that means the world to me. For so long, I felt like I didn't matter to anyone, but now I know that's not true. The dust is still settling. My dad, Carol, and Ashley are out of the house and trying to figure out their next move. Carol filed for divorce, probably thinking she could get a big payout, but there's nothing left for her to take. Ashley has gone radio silent, which is fine by me. As for me, I'm finally at peace. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. Grandpa was right. They made their bed, and now they have to lie in it.
It was an ordinary day. the kind we all experience, when routine turns into something you never expect. State Senator Alana Brooks, a dedicated public servant and loving daughter, had just wrapped up her weekly visit to her mother's home. The afternoon sun warmed the streets as she decided to make a quick stop at the local mall to pick up groceries before heading home. As she walked across the parking lot, bags in hand and her thoughts elsewhere, she felt a rare moment of peace. What Alana didn't know was that her life was about to take a sharp and unsettling turn. Parked nearby was Officer Monica Randall, a seasoned cop with a reputation for being tough and no-nonsense. Monica had been patrolling the area, her sharp eyes scanning for anything that seemed out of place. That's when she spotted Alana, a poised and well-dressed woman standing near her car. For reasons Monica couldn't quite articulate, something about the scene didn't sit right with her. Without hesitation, Monica stepped out of her cruiser, her boots crunching against the pavement, and approached Alana. Her voice cut through the quiet parking lot. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" Startled, Alana turned to face her. Calm but confused, she replied, "I'm just loading my groceries into my car." "Is there a problem?" What followed was a tense exchange that escalated far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Despite Alana's polite demeanor and clear explanation, Monica's suspicion only deepened. Her demand for ID and subsequent actions would soon unravel into a chain of events that shocked everyone involved, and left an entire community questioning the power of assumptions and bias. Stay with us as we explore this gripping story of misunderstanding, power dynamics, and the price of prejudice. This is Real Life Stories New, where we bring you real moments that inspire reflection and change. Officer Monica Randall approached Senator Alana Brooks with an air of authority, her voice sharp and probing. "I'll need to see some ID," Monica demanded, her hand resting firmly on her belt. Alana blinked, momentarily taken aback by the abrupt tone, but her composure remained steady. "Is there a reason for this, officer?" Alana asked, her voice calm but tinged with disbelief. The parking lot fell silent, the stillness interrupted only by the soft rustle of shopping bags swinging in the breeze. Monica's gaze was unwavering as she replied, "You're acting suspicious. I'll decide whether there's a reason after you show me your ID." Alana let out a quiet sigh, opening her purse to retrieve her wallet. As Monica examined the card, her expression shifted ever so slightly. "Senator Alana Brooks," she read aloud, almost as if testing the name on her tongue. Her brow furrowed, and she added dismissively, "Never heard of you." Alana offered a polite smile, though a trace of exasperation flickered in her eyes. "I represent District 12. I'm a state senator." But Monica wasn't ready to back down. Something about Alana, her presence, her confidence, seemed to rub her the wrong way. "I don't care who you are. You're coming with me," she said curtly, pocketing Alana's ID and gesturing toward the police cruiser. Alana's heart sank. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. I haven't done anything wrong," she protested, her voice still measured, but a thread of unease now evident. Monica didn't respond. Instead, she reached for her cuffs. The cold metal locked around Alana's wrists, a stark contrast to the warmth of the afternoon sun. As Monica led her toward the cruiser, Alana could feel the stares of bystanders, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Inside the patrol car, silence hung heavy. Monica gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white against the black leather. In the back seat, Alana sat upright, her expression resolute despite the growing sense of injustice. At the station, whispers filled the air as they entered. Officers glanced up from their desks, their eyes widening at the sight of the handcuffed senator. "Isn't that Senator Brooks?" one murmured, his voice barely audible over the rustle of papers and clatter of keyboards. Monica ignored them, guiding Alana down a narrow hallway to a cold, sterile interrogation room. She gestured for Alana to sit and slammed the door behind her. Alana took a seat at the metal table, the room's fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on her face. She clasped her hands together, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Minutes passed, each one stretching into what felt like an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open, and Lieutenant Marcus Gray entered the room. His broad shoulders and sharp suit gave him an air of authority, but his expression was calm, almost gentle. "Senator Brooks," he began, extending a hand. "I'm Lieutenant Gray. I'd like to apologize for the inconvenience you've experienced." Alana shook his hand, her composure intact despite the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Lieutenant, I appreciate your professionalism, but I'd like to know why I was arrested in the first place." Gray nodded, his face darkening as he opened the thin file Monica had hastily filled out. His eyes scanned the report, and a frown crept across his features. He looked up, his gaze shifting to Monica, who stood by the door with her arms crossed. "Officer Randall," he said, his voice cold. "Do you have any idea who you've brought in here?" Monica's posture stiffened. "A woman acting suspiciously in the mall parking lot," she replied, her voice defensive. Gray's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just any woman. This is Senator Alana Brooks, one of the most respected leaders in this state." A murmur rippled through the hallway outside as officers craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the unfolding drama. Monica's defiance faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. I didn't know," she stammered, her usual confidence slipping away. "That's no excuse," Gray snapped. "Your actions were reckless and unjustified. You've brought shame to this department." Alana watched silently, her expression unreadable as Monica's face turned pale. The room grew tense, the air thick with the weight of unspoken accusations. Monica opened her mouth to speak but quickly closed it, realizing there was nothing she could say to defend herself. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending an investigation," Gray continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Hand over your badge." Monica hesitated, her fingers brushing against the metal shield pinned to her uniform. Slowly, she unclipped it and placed it on the table. The sound of metal on metal echoed in the silent room. As Senator Alana Brooks stepped out of the police station, the cool evening air greeted her, offering a stark contrast to the heated confrontation she had just endured. She paused for a moment, glancing back at the building. Through the glass doors, she could see Officer Monica Randall standing alone, her badge and authority stripped away. It was a moment heavy with reflection, not of triumph, but of profound realization. Alana had done nothing wrong, yet she had been treated like a criminal. Her calm, dignified presence had carried her through the ordeal, but the sting of being judged unfairly lingered. It wasn't just about her, it was about countless others who had faced similar treatment but lacked the platform to speak up. Turning to the waiting reporters and curious onlookers, Alana spoke with the same poise that defined her career. "Today, I was reminded that prejudice and assumptions still hold power in our society. But we have the responsibility to confront these injustices head-on, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." Her words struck a chord with those gathered, sparking conversations that would ripple far beyond that moment. For Monica, the repercussions of her actions were just beginning. Suspension was only the start of what would be a long process of accountability and self-reflection. But this story isn't just about one officer's mistake or one senator's grace under pressure. It's a reminder for all of us to look beyond appearances, to question our biases, and to treat every individual with the respect they deserve. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it inspired you to act, let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts, and let's start a meaningful conversation about change. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button. Let's reach 1,000 subscribers together and continue to bring you stories that spark awareness and inspire growth. Thank you for watching Real Life Stories New, where every story matters. See you in the next one.